Dun, dun, dun. Dun, dun, dun. Saturday night. I'm in my other guy's shirt. It's all good. So the question for tonight is, Tim, I wish I had pizza, man. That actually sounds good right now. Start a poll. Is there such thing? So Tim, you're here. You get to be the first person to answer the poll. Is there such thing as a carb cam? Carburetor cam. Is there? Is there really such thing as a carburetor cam? We're going to get rolling on the poll. We're going to roll on the poll right freaking now. Boom. So when people come in, answer the poll. Is there really such a thing as a carb cam? Because we're going to talk about that tonight. I got lots of comments. For those of you, do you need to go out, Milo? Do you want to go? See, Milo's here. He's ready on. What do you think about carburetor cams? No? Okay. Okay. Let's go. Let's go. Go see. Go see mommy. There you go. Go say hello to her. Milo is out right now. He's going to go take a look for a carburetor cam. He wants to see if that's really a thing. Good luck, Milo. So the question for tonight, you take a look at the video that I posted. I just posted a video on the Junkyard 4.8 liter, which is fast becoming one of my favorite motors. I think because I resurrected it. So I feel a little bit like Dr. Frankenstein. That it's alive. 4.8 liter. We ran the carbureted induction system consisting of an Edelbrock Performer, dual plane RPM intake manifold and a 750 Holley. Maybe a little on the big side for what we were doing for 300 horsepower, 325 horsepower. Compared that to the factory truck intake manifold that came with that motor when I got it from the wrecking yard, not knowing that it was missing 3 or 4 different, well, 2 or 3 anyway, cylinders that were just not joining the party. It was disappointing. But that didn't stop me from actually getting it running. It just took longer than I thought. But the question is, for a mild motor like that, dual plane, if you're going to go with a carbureted intake manifold, dual plane, definitely the way to go. I had people chime in about, oh, well, wouldn't a single plane then match the power of the long run truck manifold? No, a single plane on a mild combination like that is just going to be terrible everywhere. Maybe it'll make as much peak power as the dual plane, although even that on this mild application, kind of questionable. But it's definitely going to lose power everywhere else. It's going to be way worse. So the cool thing is on this test, and we've seen this many, many times actually, that the dual plane intake manifold actually makes, and then on this case, it certainly made more low speed power than the long runner EFI intake manifold. Despite the fact that the air fuel curve on this thing was not ideal. And I don't think it was this particular carburetor. We tend to see this anyway. In fact, I had to resort to a 4-hole. I could have done an open spacer too. Just really, it didn't matter. What we were trying to do is take some of the signal away from the carburetor, which we did successfully. And when I brought these into the dyno cell, I actually brought a 1/2-inch open spacer and a 1/2-inch 4-hole spacer, both from Wilson. And actually the 4-hole spacer from Wilson was kind of a tapered combo deal. I don't think it was a straight 4-hole, if I remember correctly. What I was trying to do was not trying to change the power curve. What I was trying to do is change the air fuel curve, because as we rolled into the motor on the carbureted combination, it had a really good signal. It's a mild combination, very small camshaft, mild cylinder head, all of that stuff. So it was it makes low speed power fairly well, especially with that dual plane intake manifold. It has a really good signal. And so it draws a lot of fuel initially, as indicated by, if you've watched the video, an air fuel ratio down low of 9.2 to 1. Obviously not ideal for power production, although we would come to find out that it wasn't like other ones that I've shown in. If you haven't taken a look, please take a look at the tuning video where we varied the air fuel from 13 to 12 to 11 and down to 10. Not a huge change in power. In the 9s, you can get a change in power, but it's not dramatic. It wasn't in this case. So I put the carb spacer in it to take some of the signal away down low. Basically, what I was trying to do is kind of even up the air fuel curve to get it so it was a little bit smoother. And then we could go in then and adjust it. I tried adjusting it a bunch of different ways. You can do it obviously with jetting, primary and secondary jetting. The primary side on this particular carburetor, the secondary side had no power valve. The primary side did have a power valve. I actually got rid of the power valve because the problem is I had to take enough jet away where the roll-in becomes lean on the primary side. And then so what I did was took the power valve away and put jet back in it. So the roll-in was better and I could still get enough fuel on both sides because we monitor the fuel flow on the primary and secondary side. And so it's just fiddling around with both air fuel and making sure that both sides of the carburetor ideally are metering the same amount of fuel so that we know that the two sides or the front and back of the intake manifold are providing the same amount of fuel. We like to do that on carbureted stuff. It's a good idea. And on the dual plane, we found that I took big enough swings at this thing to where we got the air fuel from the 11s, from the 9s and 10s to the 11s to the 12s to the 13s. When we went to 13, over 13 to 113.2, which, everybody knows is the ideal maximum power producing air fuel ratio for a naturally aspirated combination. It's not. It made a lot less power. It did not like that at all. It liked being down in like 11.8 or something, or 12.0. So we ran that, and we ran the dual plane, and the dual plane made more low speed power than the long runner truck manifold did. It didn't make as much power. And so here are all of the comments that I get from that combination. The comments I get from that combination are, well, you didn't use a carburetor cam. So just like I didn't use a different motor, I didn't use a turbo cam, I didn't use a blower cam, I didn't use a nitrous cam. Essentially, I used the wrong cam. It's wrong cam stuff all over again. So the question in the poll today is there a carburetor? Is there actually a carburetor cam? Because people have been taught that for a long time. Just like they've been taught that there's a rec port cam and there's a cathedral port cam and there's a turbo cam. And to some extent, that's kind of true. Like if you have a cathedral port motor, you may want one kind of camshaft in it. But as I've shown in the testing, when you run that camshaft, and here's the important part. Here's the thing that nobody does. The people that make these comments, here's one thing that they never do. They never compare it to something else. They never compare it and go like, we had comments on the live feed this morning about I think a camshaft from the guys at Hughes that we were talking about. I think a Magnum cam, a 360 in LA or Magnum or one of those. And they were talking about the fact that this camshaft is specifically designed for a low compression motor. Well, it's not. What it's doing, what the camshaft is doing is it's enhancing dynamic compression. And it will do that regardless of what the compression ratio is. It doesn't matter. It's the same thing with a carbureted cam. Oh, well, the carbureted cam wants a tighter LSA or whatever the thing is that you want the carburetor to have. What they haven't done is tested that on an EFI motor. Well, what happens if I run the EFI cam and then the carbureted cam? What happens if I do that comparison when it's carbureted? And then what happens if I do that comparison when it's fuel injected? Guess what? Camshaft does, the two camshafts that you test do exactly the same thing. And that's where we got that every cam is a turbo cam, because when you do that test, oh no, we need to make a cam that does this and this and this. And then we take that cam and we put it in a motor and we put a turbo on it and look, it works. Yeah, it works because it's got a turbo. But what happens if we would have put a different cam in there? It would have worked because it's a turbo. Same thing with the carburetor and fuel injection. If you run a test that's a carbureted cam, tight LSA or whatever, it will also work on fuel injection. If you run the fuel injected camshaft on the carburetor, it will also work. There isn't, when you do that test, and this is a thing that they don't do, that nobody monitors, is that you have to compare those two things with both of those things. Like when I did the cathedral port, rec port head test, I did both heads and both cams on both heads. So we have all of the possible permutations. We have every combination, and then we can look at it and go, hey, look, when I ran these two cams on this head, it made a power change based on camshaft. When I ran these two cams on the rec port head, it made a power change based on the camshafts. The camshafts did the same thing with both heads. And that's exactly what you'll see on a carbureted cam. If we do a comparison of a carbureted cam versus a fuel injected cam on a carbureted motor, it's going to make some kind of power change based on whatever the camshafts do. If we do that same test, those two camshafts on a fuel injected version, it's going to do the same thing. And that's what a lot of people won't tell you, or a lot of people don't know because they've never run that test. Oh, they just take that as gospel. Oh, that's a carbureted cam. You need a carbureted cam. Like the motor won't run as a carbureted motor with anything that's not designated as a carburetor cam. I have news for you. It will definitely run, and it will definitely make power. And like I said, if you test it and compare it to something else, it's going to work. It's like taking an LS and you have a stock cam. And then since I'm running carbureted, I put a carbureted cam on and look how much power I got. Yeah, because you put a cam that's bigger than the stock one in an LS. And what's going to happen when we put a better cam in an LS? I don't care if it's a carbureted cam or a twin turbo cam or a single turbo cam or a nitrous cam or an NA cam or whatever. If you put a cam that has different than stock lift and duration and LSA and valve event numbers, it's going to make more power because that's what camshafts do. But they never test that. And I wish people would kind of get over that and not think that the thing that they're working on will only work with one particular kind of thing. They need to realize that you need to look at the NA power output of whatever you're starting with, look at the NA power output of whatever you're ending with, and then you can extrapolate from there. Hey, look, I ran it carbureted. That doesn't mean that it doesn't work or that it only works with the carburetor. It also works with fuel injection. It also works with boost. It also works with nitrous. It works with low compression and high compression. All of that stuff is the same because that's what camshafts do. They're all carburetor cams. Cams are cams. And that's not this. And then we need to step back a little bit and look at that comparison. When we do a camshaft comparison, one of those cams worked better than the other, whatever that is. It's pretty easy to go from a stock cam to any other cam and gain lots of power. So you're like, hey, yeah, that worked really good. It's when you gain lots of power, then you start trying to improve upon the one that you gain lots of power on. So if I ran a 459 cam, what happens if I run a 469 cam? Well, maybe it's a little better at the top, maybe past the power peak. It's a little worse down low. Everywhere else it was the same. Which one of those would you choose? Then you have to make a decision. If you keep going up in power, that's fairly easy. If you keep going up in power and on the top and trade stuff down low, that's a decision. If you start losing power, that's a pretty easy decision. But that's a lot of times what happens with camshafts. And you ultimately are, at some point, you're going to have some sort of trade-off. And then at some other point, you're going to get losses. And that's what it does. And look at that as an NA combination and look at what the camshaft is doing. And then go, hey, look. That's why I tell people when they're doing nitrous cams, you're doing a nitrous cam, just make lots of power NA. Then if you add 100 shot to a 500 horsepower motor, you're going to have 600. Don't try to have a magic cam that only makes 450 horsepower, because then when you add 100 to that, if you add 100 to it, it's going to make 550. It's not going to make 600 like the better camshaft did that was not a nitrous cam, but it happened to make more NA power. That's what you need to do. Same thing with this cam, same thing with this test. And on this test, on the dual plane versus the long runner factory truck manifold, it was a stock motor. I mean, it had a stock camshaft. It was a 4.8 liter with a stock camshaft. I think that this cam was actually the L33 cam, which was just arguably even a little bit better than an LR4 camshaft. But it had a stock camshaft in it. It had the stock lifters and push rods and all that stuff in it, stock springs, all that. Because this is before I did any of the, before I put the Truck Norris cam in it. Oh, but Richard, what would happen if you ran the Truck Norris cam? Well, we would just start from whatever the new power output is. And the Truck Norris cam, even though we know it's a EFI truck cam, it would also work with a carburetor. It's just that, as we saw, because people are thinking that, well, if you had and I think that their contention is that if we had a carbureted combination and we combine that with a carbureted camshaft, that will work better. It will. It will make more power, but it will make more power because that camshaft makes more power. If we take that combination now with the carburetor cam and put the truck manifold on it, it's going to do the same thing. It's going to be better in the same area. It's going to be not better in the same area. All of that is still going to happen. You may wiggle that around just a little bit, but you won't find that camshaft to just be better on the carbureted combination and just completely dismiss and not be useful on the EFI combination. I in all of my years of testing and back-to-back testing, have never seen anything like that ever happen. I've only seen, hey, look, we ran a camshaft. It did this. And then we put something else on. It still does that. Yeah, that's kind of the way that it happens. So how is, that's my spiel for camshafts. Every cam is a cam. Just do what it does NA and then go from there. Put boost on it, put a Vortec on it, put a 2650 roots blower on it, or a Whipple or twin screw, a Kenny Bell, whatever, nitrous. It just works. The cam is going to do what it does. It's going to be, too big for your converter and for low speed power and stuff. It's going to do that whether you got boost on it or not. It's going to be worse for boost. All of those things can be taken into consideration, but start with a cam that makes the power output that you want and then do the other stuff. Let's see. Todd, you're up the ranch. Good, man. I'm glad to see you're out. All cams are carb cams. Yep. Let's see. Too bad we don't have the double over cam adjustability like Coyote engines on the LS side. That would be nice, but we don't have the number of camshafts available for a Coyote that you do for an LS. There's hundreds of cams for LS motors. Let's see. They should sell an irrigation pump cam. That's what everybody wants. That's an interesting point. I work with the guys from my buddy Jimmy from HP Performance. Long ago, they actually did these industrial motors for irrigation pumps. And I think that these were big block Fords. And so we were talking, going back and forth. One of the things that they would allow them to change were camshafts. And so you're talking about an industrial motor that needs to run at I think they were running at 1800 or 2000 RPM or something like that. And so they're trying to adjust cam timing, to make more power there. And naturally, you can't put a 236 cam in there and have it work well at 1800 RPM. The cam timing has to be, necessarily small. And also, it has to last a long time. So it can't have really like excessive ramp rates and stuff. And so you have to fiddle around with 1 or 2 degrees here and there and try to make that work. And the other problem, the other uphill battle you have is that camshafts don't do a lot at 1800 RPM. There's only so much wiggle room that you have. Short, and since this was a big block Ford, it was not a variable cam application. So there's only so much that they could do. What they needed was the things that make power. One is displacement is really the big thing. You could make it much bigger. Instead of a 460, you could make it a 500 or 550, and that would help a lot. Cylinder heads to some extent, but again, even at 1800 RPM, there's a limit to what you could do to head flow, because on any of these cylinder heads, you're not asking it to flow very much at 1800 RPM. Let's face it, it's not making very much power. And it's not consuming very much airflow at that engine speed. So wildly ported heads, that's not going to really do anything. It might hurt it, if anything. Displacement is going to do something. The thing that I wanted them to try, and we didn't talk about this till way after that, is I wanted them to try super long runner intake manifolds, because that would definitely help. They'd have to be really, really long for 1800 RPM though, but it would still be cool. Tighter lobe separation cams also work better with carbs, as the EFI needs less overlap and more vacuum. That's not true. It works on both of them. You can. I don't know why you would think that a carburetor would be able to run on a low vacuum signal better than EFI can run on a low vacuum signal. I've never understood that. So, Loafer, you're going to go watch Jake Paul get knocked out. Is he fighting tonight? Is that what's going on? I don't want to get in the way of that. James, I think that the closed loop self-learning things might have problems with certain kinds of certain kinds of camshafts. But I also think the carburetors do that too. I think if you have a really, really lumpy camshaft, if it's really big, it has a tight LSA and it has lots of duration, because that's the thing. You can get like the Truck Norris cam has 107.5 LSA. So that's pretty tight for a street EFI camshaft, if you will. Obviously, it's a carburetor cam too. We could have run that easily with a carburetor, but it also has low duration. So, but if you have 107-degree LSA and you have 280 degrees of duration, it's not going to idle very well. It's not going to idle very well with EFI, and it's not going to idle very well with a carburetor. You have to raise the idle speed normally with either one of those to get that thing to be kind of manageable. I need help building a 302 for a 79 F-150 4x4 for good mileage. I get 18 miles per gallon of the original 351M, which isn't bad. That's actually really good on the freeway. What part should I get for a 98 T-Bird 5-liter? If I was getting 18 miles per gallon out of a 351M in there, I think I would just keep that in there. Was it like a 2-barrel 351M then? If you're gonna stay, are you staying carbureted? If you're staying carbureted, then I would put I might be tempted to put a small quadrijet on there if you're going for fuel mileage. Richard, why were you wearing glasses in one of the episodes of Engine Masters when you're filling in for Steve? I'm wearing glasses now. Does he want case walk a Fox body? You'd want to case swap a 4-cylinder Mustang then, right? A Fox one. Yeah, Racer, that's one of the things that people didn't get. We, for the video, you want to get people riled up and get the carb guys on one side and the fuel injection guys on the other side. But really this, like others, and I mentioned this in the video, that it's really a test of the truck manifold specifically and the dual plane intake manifold specifically, because you can tune whatever carbureted intake manifold you put on there. We could have put a Victor Jr. or a Holley single plane or any of those things on there. And then we could have put a different EFI intake manifold on there. We could have put one of those junky short runner fabricated manifolds on there and lost all the torque. We could have put a fast on there, or which would do okay, but not, I don't think it'd be much better down low than, or if any, than the truck manifold. You could have put a Trailblazer SS intake manifold on there too. Unless I can get a 5.9 12 valve cheap. Oh, Cummins stuff. How do you correctly tune an MSD 614 LS setup, timing, and any special settings? I don't know if that one has load, but when we're doing timing, we just put a timing curve in it at wide open throttle, because all the stuff we're doing on the engine dyno is wide open throttle. So you just go to the viewer section and it'll show you it'll show you the graph of where your timing is, and then you can just grab onto. They have a few dots in there basically, and you can adjust them to what you want to be. You have your, and it's based on RPM. And you probably could also base it on load, but we don't do that. We just have timing and RPM because we're going to wide open throttle anyway. So we're looking at an idle timing and then a transition timing. It goes from whatever the idle timing is. Let's say that's 10 or 12 or 14 degrees, whatever the idle timing is. And then it'll go up to like let's say our load point is 3,000 RPM. So at 3,000 RPM, it might be, if we were going to run, like for instance, it's on this carbureted combination on the MSDs, it shows more timing than we show on the Holley HP for it to make the same amount of power. So what I mean by that is we keep adding timing. There's basically 2 degrees of delay built into the timing box. So we normally run around 32 degrees on these carbureted combinations. That seems to be the number. And so we'll put 32 degrees going all the way across from, I don't know, 5,000 to 6,500 or 4,500 or whatever. It just depends. And sometimes we'll put a little bit of curve in there. We'll ramp it in, but we'll play with it and see what it wants. We'll just ask it and go, hey, do you like 25 degrees there? Yeah, that seemed to be pretty good. Oh, I like 27. 28 didn't really do anything. We'll bring it back down to 27. And then we'll put the curve in that it wants. And then once you have that curve, then it's kind of set. I don't ever use any of the supplied curves that they have with those kits. I've never used any of those for anything. Is a performer RPM a good intake on a Ford FE? Honestly, I've not tested either one of those. I've never run an FE on the engine dyno, so I'm the wrong guy to ask about that. The factory four barrel on a Pontiac we know is good. What injectors were on the truck manifold? I think that these were 80s. Richard, what's your opinion of running a huge bore LQ9? I don't know what 6.9 liters is going to be, but you can't run we don't ever even go to 4065 bore, which would make it a 6.2. Unless you're going to sleeve the block, you can't go with a really big bore on an LQ9 block. What would be a good cam for a 40 over 6 liter? Well, John, it depends on what you're trying to do. What is it you're trying to achieve? What is your combination of things that you want? You need to go down your list and go, okay, I want stock converter or not stock converter. How much converter do I want? Is it a daily driver? What RPM range do I want to run in? What gears do I have? What's my tire size? What is my available? What am I okay with in terms of fuel mileage and drivability? All of those things are going to dictate which one you want. You're going to put something in there. You're going to go to the range that you have is stock. You could even go smaller than stock, I guess. But if it's an early LQ4, you already have the smallest factory camshaft that will fit in there. And then you have whatever else will fit with available piston to valve clearance. So you have that range in there. And then somewhere in there is going to be the cam that you want that provides your best combination, depending on how you answer all those questions. Something let's see here. Something I don't understand. Why don't you use the original common rail system with different injectors instead of the carby looking injector system you seem to use? Are you talking about, because on this test, if you look at this test, and whenever I run this intake manifold, the truck intake manifold, that's the factory rail. So I don't know how more stock I can get than that. The only thing we did was change different fuel injectors in it. And we made it, the injectors are taller than the factory ones were. So all I did was space the rail up a little bit, but that's the factory rail. So he doesn't like stages on camshafts. The only reason that the stages are used is to lots of people don't understand camshafts. In fact, I would venture to say that most people don't understand camshafts. And I tried to convey this to the guys at Brian Tooley and other people that I've talked to. I'm like, look, if you start talking to somebody, the average guy that wants to talk to you about camshafts, if you start talking to them about valve events, you may as well be talking to them about neurosurgery, because they're not going to understand that. They're not going to get that. But the average guy that knows nothing about camshafts that wants to put a camshaft in, he understands that a stage 2 is bigger than a stage 1. We have to get the people that don't understand these things as well as others. We have to try to help them and get them up to speed. There are lots of things that I don't know, and I like it much better when somebody starts at the beginning and then eases me into something, and then I go, oh, okay, yeah, no, I get that, and then now we can go to something else. If you're teaching somebody to play golf or tennis, they have to understand what a tennis racket is or what a tennis ball is, and what the court is and what the rules are and everything before you can teach them how to like do a trick serve or something. You need to learn the basics first, and that's what we would be teaching them. And that's what stages do, I think. Let's see. On the 4.8, was that a Trailblazer SS? No, it's not a Trailblazer SS. It's just an early truck manifold. And the Trailblazer SS would have added very little, if anything, on a stock motor. It would have been, the Trailblazer SS is better than the early truck manifold. You can take a look at the videos that I put up where I've tested that many, many times. The Trailblazer SS is better. It's not as good as a fast manifold, but it is better. But the gains that you get from using that manifold versus the truck manifold increase when you have a more powerful combination. And just remember, every cam is the wrong cam. Exactly. I'm pretty sure my ancient Excel Gen 7 allows a forced open loop tuning for idle. How well did the LS carb intake portion line up with the heads? As Ford guy, I've noticed the Edelbrock intake seem to be engine builder intakes where the intake ports are much smaller than the heads. It'd be okay if the intake ports were smaller than the heads, and any sort of port mismatch would not be the reason that it's not making power. I have an idea for a video, COP versus distributor, pros and cons. If you can get the same kilovolt output of the distributor, what's the gain to go to coil unplug? It's not just voltage output, but it's rise time for coil unplug stuff. If coil unplug didn't have an advantage, and not, we need to dismiss power for a second because that's not it. But if it didn't have an advantage for fuel mileage or emissions, the OEMs would not use it because it's more expensive to have eight coils than it is to have one coil. That's pretty simple math. So there is something there. There is also something there if we're trying to do maximum power stuff. The factory LS stuff, if you put 4.5 milliseconds of dwell in it, and normally I run those LS3 style coils, and if you run that, you can run it up to 1,500 horsepower. And probably more than that. I just have never gone beyond that. I guess what I meant to ask is if you can run a Holley high ram with a high compression big bore LS with decent results as an NA. Yeah, a high ram is a good choice for an all motor application. You can see I've run a couple of those. A tunnel ram style manifold like that works really well. It's been my experience that it makes more power with a lid on it that's different than the single 105 millimeter opening that they have. Like the 4-hole deal did better, and then the carburetors on top of there did even better than the fuel injection did because of charge cooling. Do you have any tips on tuning a carburetor that's technically oversized for the application? This 750 was certainly oversized for my for this stock 4.8. It was too much carburetor for it. The 780 on my DZ302, the 780 is not technically not as oversized as you would think because it's a vacuum secondary carburetor. So you're not using all of the carburetor kind of until it's ready, but it might take some tuning with the spring, the secondary spring. Is a Trailblazer SS the same as a V8 Envoy intake manifold? I don't know. I don't know what year that is. Which comp cam would work better for a 250 nitrous shot? That's the wrong question. Daryl, the question you should be asking is, which camshaft makes the most NA power? The 459 or the 469? You can look up the results. I've run those cams compared to each other. That video is up. They make exactly the same power. The 469 makes a little more after the power peak, and the 459 makes a little more way down low. But other than that, they overlay each other. I have 35s with 456s built for all 60, but haven't decided on what converter. Definitely going to install. You're going to need that. Wanting a power range of 3,500 to 6,500. Also planning on using 53706 heads. You're going to put 706 heads on a 6-liter. Is that what it is, John? Tony, I actually don't know. And I've tested it many times. His question is, what's the best guess as to why a carbureted dual plane makes more torque to 4,200 than a long runner truck manifold? It's not just runner length, because if you measure it, it's not that. There's something else going on that I don't really understand about the dual plane. Some of it is charge cooling because we don't have charge cooling with the EFI intake manifold. So some of it is that, but I don't think that all of it is. even if you understand, this is a good pendant. This is good. Even if you understand cams, you can't be sure of what a change will do till you test it. The people that I get some of, I'm not going to say a lot of, but I have people that want to use like computer simulators because they don't have access to dynos. I completely understand that. I tell them the same thing every time. It's really good for playing with. It's fun because you can go on and you can spend hours doing simulation. Well, what happens if I change the duration by 2 degrees or 1 degree or whatever? What happens? They're really good for demonstrating trends. But what they want, and this is especially the case after they have spent endless amounts of time on there, they want that to be the equivalent of like actual dyno testing. They want to argue with me about their results versus dyno tests. I'm like, look, I'm not going to do that. You are right. There's a reason that that's called a simulator and that it's not called a dyno, because it's not telling you dyno results. It's telling you what might happen. And this thing that I'm using over here is telling me what did happen. And those are different things. And, you know, a lot of guys use these computer stuff to give them ideas on trends and things to test. I think that that's really, really good, but it's not an absolute thing. Yo, mama, what's up? But yeah, I thought you had a question, man. I thought I was excited about it, but thank you very much. What's the first coil unplug you ever saw? I saw an RX4 with a 13B with 4 XL super coils hooked up to the distributor with a single plug wire going to each. Wow. Next time will be for a signed shirt. These are the only shirts I have. Lisa made these for me. You guys are making me buy another classic. Which one are you buying, Mega? Has there ever been a dyno you've run where the block can flow much more than the intake can flow by means of displacement? I think that that's true of every block. To give you an idea, the LS stuff we've made 1,500 horsepower with. So it's way more than the intake was, although not more than the intake, I guess, under boost. But intake manifolds can become restrictive if that's your question. And it's not necessarily displacement. The intake isn't displacement oriented. It's power. It's usually airflow. The Signed Killer Be Sure is one of my all-time favorite prized possessions. Those are limited edition. They're not made anymore. I think an LS2408 with rec port heads will be the foundation for my 944 turbo build. That'll be good. And it's got to be a turbo motor then, right? VW base trailing arms, so maybe long travel build with sealed cabin, but open bed with a spare and a jerry. So is this going to be an off-road 944? I really like 944s. They handle really well. So did you guys see all the, I don't know if you follow Steve Dulcich. Did you see the post that he made on Instagram? He has like 20 440 core motors that he's selling. So if anybody needs a 440 core motor, you need to get a hold of Dulcich. I kind of want one of those, but I think that they're around $1,900, and unfortunately, I don't have that kind of money to get a core motor. The 6-liter has 873 heads. My 5.3 heads are 706 heads and was told bring my compression up, but when it comes to heads, I'm not too sure about them. What is an 873 head? Is that an early iron head or something? 400M torque storm application. Currently Sniper TBI. Will it provide charge cooling like carburetors not requiring intercooling? Well, those are two different questions. One, if you're blowing through an EFI that's injecting fuel, a 4-hole throttle body, it will provide charge cooling. But that doesn't mean that you don't need an intercooler. I recommend an intercooler for every application, even on a blow through. If you're only running 7 pounds and you're blowing through it, just have at it. But if you're trying to do more than that, I would put an intercooler on it because an intercooler will help even on a blow through application. But yes, you will get charge cooling from that. AJ, I said yes, only because early EFI was picky about what cams were used. So Ford truck guys used to stay above 112 LSA for the E4 stuff in the trucks. And for a factory EFI setup, that might be something to talk about. Although we've run tighter LSA stuff, you just have to have the ability to tune it. And the mass air stuff was a lot more forgiving than the speed density stuff until you could go in and retune the speed density stuff. And then, because we use speed density on the Holly stuff all the time. So then you can go in and adjust it. I'm selling a 413 Dodge 3-speed. (2003) and yes, iron head. So 2003 wouldn't be an iron head though, right? I thought that those were 99 and 2000 only. But if it is an iron head, then yeah, you'd be better off going with an aluminum head. I don't know if I would go with I would put a 706 head on a 6-liter if I was just concerned about like sub 5,000 RPM torque. Otherwise, I would replace the 317 head or that other iron head with like a 799 head or something. Draw through intercooled turbo. No, I wouldn't do that. Trophy truck powered by a trophy 4-cylinder. It had to be really small. And speaking of that, I saw on Instagram tonight, and I've seen it a couple times, these little tiny vehicles that these guys are building that only fits like one guy or maybe two guys in it. They look like old Zingers, like the old cartoon ones, but they're drivable cars and they have full-size motors in them. They're just insane and they're really, really cool. I like the little ones. Like I like little Kai class cars and stuff. And these things with gigantic motors in them are just kind of awesome. What is your opinion on an MS4 cam? I don't think I've ever run one, but if you told me the specs, I could kind of tell you what they're going to do. 400M, can I use 351 Cleveland forged pistons with the torque storm lower deck height? I don't know about the compression height and all that stuff of the 400 versus the 351. I thought that we used 351 pistons in the 400M that I did, but I can't swear to that. I'm thinking kind of now that we use stock ones. So Russell, you're building a trophy 944? What do you think about displacement nitrous? For example, 416 LS, LS3, rec port headed carb. Would you shoot more nitrous on a smaller cubic inch or make a 408 LS cubic inch with more nitrous? You shouldn't be thinking about just solely displacement. Think about power output. A bigger motor usually can make more power. If you can make more NA power, you can run more nitrous on it. If that's your deal, if you want to run like a 500 shot on something, you're better off going with a bigger motor that makes more NA power. It's very hard you can't run a 500 shot on a 500 horsepower 4.8 or 5.3 if you could make that. You could do it much easier if you have a 600 or 700 horsepower 408 or 416. Then you can run more nitrous on it. Because the nitrous that this thing will tolerate or ingest and process is a function of the NA power output. Hey, for 65 Dart, I wanted to run a Holly 2-barrel sniper setup, but some people say they have issues with those guys. I don't know about I've never run the 2-barrel setup. I've seen it done on, I thought that they had a setup for the 300 inline 6-cylinder Ford motor, that they had a kit for that, but I've never tried it, so I'm the wrong guy to ask. Cross carts are big. Is that what it is? Is that what I'm looking at? These look like trucks and stuff. Grindhard Plumbing, they do some fun things with Barbie Jeeps and vans. I've seen guys do some crazy stuff with the Power Wheels too. Towed by the Short and Winnebagos. Yeah, you got to do that, right? Because you could do it as a Jeep. You could do it on almost anything. Have you done any testing as far as Gen 5 direct injection fuel systems capable of upgrades with 1,000+ horsepower? No, you almost have to go to a supplemental fuel system, like a port injection. So you have to get everything that you can out of the DI stuff, which is normally the LT4 stuff. So LT4 injectors, a different feed pump, the LT4 pump, and then you can also do the cam lobe. But once you do that, you're limited, and the problem is that most guys that are doing these are wanting to do it with forced induction, so that takes away some of the fuel. They're wanting to do it the E85, that takes away some of the fuel, and you end up with the need to supply much more fuel than even that upgraded system, which, by the way, is not a cheap deal. Then you have to supplement it usually with port injection, and then that's what guys do. They have both of them running. Is the best cam always going to be an NA cam and NOS turbo blower cams? It's not a myth. You have other camshafts that will do different things, but if you want to see what they'll do, run them NA. Mega, I thought turbo cams just didn't have as much overlap, so you don't blow boost out. I don't really know. Well, here's the thing that I tell everybody about turbo cams that think that overlap actually causes that. On a turbo application, you have more back pressure than boost pressure. So actually, the way the flow would happen is if you had overlap and you were worried about there being flow going in or out, it would actually go the other way. The back pressure would go toward the boost pressure because one of those is higher than the other. So the direction of flow would go from high to low. But that's actually not happening, so you don't have to worry about that. So are all cams a street cam? No, there some cams are not street cams. Although if you look at the what's the drag racing class? Not street outlaws. Drag week cars. If you look at those guys have some pretty big cams in those things, and they can drive them on the street. So the difference between what you can make work on the street and what actually is a street, like I don't consider those street cars. I know that they drive them and they tow them with a trailer and they drive and have driven them in the rain and stuff, but that's not a car that I would get in and go, hey, look, I'm going to New York today. My truck, I went to Ohio and broke my transmission. That's not a car I would go do that. That's my definition of street car. We used to talk about that. My buddy Bernie and I always talk about, well, what's our definition of a real street car? Well, that's this car that we could drive right now, go to the Silver State race in the Silver State race, and then drive it back. That's the thing. You obviously couldn't do that with a drag week car, but the thing that they're doing is kind of amazing. So it's everybody's own definition. The specs are 239, 242. That's pretty big camshaft. I don't think that that's going to fit stock piston to valve clearance. So do you have valve reliefs for that? Engine Masters just did a show about Ellis oil pumps. Yeah, that is up now. Awesome test on the dyno. What would be a combination that you'd need? The high oil pump they use an M295, a 296, and I forgot the other part numbers. It might be a good idea to use that on turbo applications where you're feeding the turbo, and so you're using up some of that oil. The other application is if you have put together a combination and it's a performance application where you have greater than stock bearing clearances, which is pretty normal for performance applications. Cross carts are single seat motorcycle engine carts that are raced on asphalt. Yeah, that's not what I'm talking about, though. Summit came out with some newer turbo cams that are intended for twin turbo T6 turbos that have more overlap than their previous turbo cams. What carb would you run on a Gen 6 454? If it's a stock one, I would put a 650 on it. Maybe maybe a Quadrajet, because that's how I roll. Best rear end ratio for a 65 Biscayne. Awesome. Thumbs up for that. Carb 5.3, sloppy stage 2 cam. Ooh. Springs, turbo 400, twin 3582s. You should put a different camshaft in that. It'd be much better with a different camshaft. Process of putting together a Ford 9-inch. What is it you're trying to get done? If it's a street car, I would put like a 308 or a 355 or something like that. I don't know what the Ford 9-inch rears are. And you said it was, did you tell me what transmission is in that thing? Oh, turbo 400. So yeah, I would go with a 3 Series gear. You're going to have way more power than you need. Woody's happy to help, man. What brand carburetor? For me, I would go cheap. I like the Brawler carburetors, especially when they were a lot more inexpensive than they are now. But those worked well. Alvin, you have to remind me when you ask another question. Oh, what cam would I recommend for twin GT35s, which is like 1,000 horsepower or more worth of power for a 5.3. I'd put a smaller camshaft in the 5.3. I would probably put that Truck Norris cam in there. It would get boost a lot sooner than it does on a sloppy stage 2. Turbo low boost 6-liter versus an NA 408, mild for towing. Trophy cart. I thought guys were talking about trophy cart, but they were saying that it was a go-kart though. Oh, cross carts. Cross carts versus trophy carts. Okay, cool. I would, for me, I think I would tend toward an NA motor for towing. Richard, what should I take into consideration for cam choice for a manual trans S10 and stock Elm 7 swapped? I see a lot of talk about converter. You don't have to worry about converter choice when you're talking about that. So on your list of things that you're looking for, you just get rid of that because a manual trans is not going to be a problem. Then you have to worry or think about idle quality, fuel mileage, average power production. How often do you drive this, all that stuff, and what kind of power you want. And then you just pick the cam according to that. Guido drove his 8-second 65 GTO from Canada to Florida and back. That's really good. But the thing is that if you have a 2,500 or 3,000 horsepower car, because you did that, that's the exception and not the rule. That's not, you have a stock car that you would drive around every day. That's a street car. Those are not street cars to me. That's just me. When do we get more K-Series content? After I test it. Why can't I get my quick fill 650 to idle below 1,300 RPM? Do you have a vacuum leak somewhere? What's been your highest dyno number on cathedral port heads for an NA application? I'm thinking like mid-6s probably, if I remember right. I've never tried to build an all-out motor that made the most power possible. The only thing that particular combination had is we were testing different camshafts, and then we had pretty good cylinder heads on it. It was a 408. It wasn't anything special, but it had a 408. It had a fast intake manifold on it and stuff. And I think that was probably the most power. I'd have to go back and look through thousands of dyno tests rather than just use my memory. I'm using an XM282 HR camshaft on my Gen 6 twin turbo. So you should be 450-ish horsepower or something with that thing to start out with. Are Summit carburetors any good? I don't know. I don't know that I've ever run one, but they're not their carburetors. Somebody does them for them. So somebody else, it's got to be a Holley or some other brand. Is there really such a thing as a carburetor cam? 79% are saying no and 21% are saying yes. More 300 Fords and inline-sixes. Is a 2.2 ready for a GT45? 1,000 horsepower. It'd be hard pressed to ever make that. Can you do a video on intake, headers, and tune NA? 85% of us want to know the truth. So you want to do an intake manifold and headers and a tune on an otherwise stock LS? None of those things would be the things that I would recommend other than the tune. What I would recommend is a camshaft. If you have an LS, the very first thing you should put in, even before you do a catback exhaust, before you do a cold air, you should put a camshaft in it. What about a Tesla with a GT500 supercharger versus the LSA at the same boost? That would all be great, except I don't have either one of those blowers. Have I ever tested the Cam Motion Junkyard Dog Cam? I have not. I have a 2008 Suburban replacing the 5.3 with a 370 Gen 4 6-liter truck Norris cam ported polished intakes. The factory injectors will not be okay for that. You need bigger injectors. I have a Summit Remand Quadrajet on my dump truck. Awesome. For 4 years, works great. Cam and springs is definitely the way to go with an LS. You're going to gain more from that than you will with anything. Why do I prefer NA for towing applications? Only because I think it's less problematic. It's easier to tune an NA motor for towing than it would be to do a turbo. A turbo for towing would be, the tune would be ultra critical. And if you can get that right, then it works very well. It's easy to get the tune right on an NA combination. Brian, I have a 188 millimeter turbo for the Cutlass 5.3 burnout car. That's plenty, but with rain gap, head gaskets, rod bolts, should I run single or compound with a 7.3 turbo? I haven't ever seen the need for a compound on a gas motor. I haven't seen the need for that. And on a 7.3 liter, you should be able to spool a pretty big turbo with that. I don't know what you're trying to do with it, but that would be able to spool a really big turbo and make lots of power. What's the best cam for a stock liter truck? Again, you got to decide all the things that you want. There's a whole list of things that go into a cam choice. What eBay turbo for a Chrysler 2.5? Got a few spare manifolds I can drill for a T3. I would start out with something small. I would start out with it's definitely going to be a T3, and it might be a T3 T04, I think would be what most people would use. Can you run the cam swap test again on the L33 with an Edelbrock dual plane? No, thank you. Love the cam lip versus horsepower video. The results aren't unexpected with the flow rates of the 799. The Stacy, the head keeps flowing till 700 lift. So this is not a flow issue with the 799s. It makes peak flow at 700 lift. It flows more at 600 than it does at 500. So the flow is still going up. So these people that keep saying, oh, well, the head stalls at 500. It doesn't stall at 500. It keeps going at 600 and it keeps going at 700. Not a lot, but it's going up. The factory must do a lot of R&D on the turbo vehicles to get the low speed tune just right. It is. It's hard. It's a lot of load. And especially if you're going up a grade for a long time and you're in boost for a long time, you're taking time away because you don't want it to detonate. Then the EGTs get really high, and then it wants to detonate because of the EGTs. It's a whole thing. I mean, I'd love to jam a trophy 4-cylinder in something small on a Miata. If you have a Miata and you want to put something cool in a Miata, you should put a K series in it. Do Summit carburetors use Holly jets or Autolite Motorcraft 4 jets? I don't know. I've never even run a Summit carburetor. Didn't you compound turbo the 1 liter? I did. I did that as a G-Wiz thing on my own dyno jet in my own shop back in the day in Vegas. Only because I had both of them and wanted to see what happened. Does a mild cam ruin an original 85 Mustang? No, it doesn't. It makes it better. It drops off after 500 lift. No, a 799 head does not. The flow rate does not drop off after 500. John, thank you very much. You don't have to do that, but always appreciated. Test the GT500 versus the LSA. I don't have either one of those blowers, so it doesn't matter. Truck manifold is much more like a dual plane than a single plane. Will I be limited at valve size if I build a 5.3 383 turbo pump gas 91? I've watched the 383 versus 6 liter video. Would you suggest a 6 liter turbo or a 383 turbo focuses on reliability? You have to tell me more about what you're trying to get out of it. I wouldn't do, if you're building a turbo, I would just go get a 5.3 and put a cam in it and springs and injectors and then put a turbo on it. You can normally get, especially if you're running 91, you're not trying to make a lot of power. If you're focused on reliability, don't do the stroker and also don't spend the money on a 6 liter. Just get a 5.3. A 5.3 with boost and a cam will make the power that you want. The shop I had, I didn't have a shop. I did have a shop. It's more of a storage unit, I think. In Vegas, it was off of Russell Road outside of Las Vegas back when I lived there. Don't you recommend the slant 6 for the Miata? Why wouldn't you just put a like a Cummins 6-cylinder turbo in there or something? Just be really silly. I noticed you're dynoing engines with 799 heads. Could you dyno them with 706 or 862 heads since they made more power? No, that doesn't make any sense. I'm not dynoing them because I'm trying to make the most power. Otherwise, I would be building a motor to do that. What I'm dynoing is a motor that I found in the wrecking yard, like lots of other motors that I've tested. Most of the ones, in fact, 99% of the other ones that I found that 100% before this, that I found either 4.8s or 5.3s all have 706 or 862 heads because that's what they originally came with. This motor is an all aluminum L33 that I was lucky enough to find in the wrecking yard. It came from the factory with 799 heads. That's why I run those heads, because it's the stock head for that motor. Have you ever tried a Type 106 or 108 LSA? Did you see the videos that I have up on the truck Norris cam is a 107.5. So the answer to that is yes. What are you planning for the next time you go to West Tech? I want to do a twin turbo deal. I want to do the more max speeding turbo stuff. And I'd kind of like to do I need to finish the Ford Summit cams. I got a lot of stuff to do. Call. I'm sorry if the question wasn't clear. Torque Storm costs $3,500 for a fun 150 plus horsepower. A cam costs $2,000. A cam costs $2,000 installed. So that's a lot. You could do that yourself, man. So what about supporting mods, intakes, headers? Long tube headers would add power. I would not put shorty headers on there. Those are a waste of time. The tune should definitely add power if you're able to do that. Watching 5.3 turbos at drag strips, you can hear them lag under 4,000. I don't know. I'm not good enough to be in the stands to listen to a motor and tell what RPM that is and where it's lagging at. But you can get full boost way before 4,000 RPM with the right turbo on a cammed 5.3. Is the K20 head the best flowing stock head for any stock motor? I don't think so. Twin turbo 2.2. I don't know that we need to do 2 turbos on that. Although the thing that I want to do 2 turbos on is the L28 Nissan motor. And we need to do chili bomb testing. Exactly. That's a good point, Nick. Yeah, make sure to press the like button. What is our poll doing? Is there really such a thing as a carburetor cam? 78% saying no, 22% saying yes. We have 2 more minutes and then it's time to go. In fact, I'm going to end our poll right now at 78% saying the negative. Twins on the L28. Yeah, just not because it needs twins. It doesn't. It's just that the reason, and these are the reasoning. This is the reasoning behind stuff like this. This is what happens. So you have an inline 6-cylinder, and the header for an inline 6-cylinder. Some of the headers that are available, some of them are 6 into 1. Lots of them are 3 into 2 into 1. So they're like a tri-Y deal. But if you take off the last Y section, what you have are 2 3 into 1s. And if you run those as exhaust under the motor to the other side, you have 2 positions for 2 turbos. So then it looks like a twin, a la like an RB26 or something. It will just look cool. And you could say you have a twin turbo inline 6-cylinder, which is better than saying I have a turbo 6-cylinder. What motor do you recommend for my Z06 2008 for road race? What motor do I recommend? Does it not have one in it already? Not sure if you've done a tuning episode. I'm not really a tuner, but I just put up a video just recently showing you the effect of tuning. It shows you what 13 to 1 does, 12, 11, 10 to 1 does. It shows you what 29 degrees does, 24, 20, and 17 or something. So it showed you what that is, not how to go about manipulating the values to achieve that, though. And maybe you want that. Yeah, and everybody go hit the like button. Have you done a video specifically for high RAM dyno testing? Yes, there's stuff up there. I have a spare Holley 102, so I'm wondering if it would be worth it to run in the high compression. The high compression and all that stuff doesn't matter. The intake manifold determines where the motor wants to make power, and a high RAM is higher than like a fast or something. On most applications, a fast is a better manifold than a high RAM is, up to 6,500 or so, depending on what motor you're testing it on. But a high RAM will typically make more peak power. Richard's using us to draw from our life force. That's right. Your essence, if I were Gargamel. Yes, that's right. Smurf. 408 stroker, AFR 185s, ran 720s in the 8th. I just got a set of AFR 220s. Renegade heads, Victor Jr., what size cam? Take a look at the 408 videos I have up. You can take a look at 2 cams that we ran. One of them was an XFI 236 cam. The other one was I'm not seeing what camshaft you had in there, but the other one was much bigger than that, a big trick flow cam. So you can take a look at the power curves on those and see which one you like. The 243, Brent, and the 243 head is definitely better than the 241 head. I have that video up. Richard, would you take time to unshroud the valves and home port the heads? It depends. It depends on what you're trying to do. If you can get all of the power out of a turbo with stock heads, then why would you go to the trouble of doing that? It just happened at a lower boost level. But if you're trying to make as much NA power as you can, that's a good way to go, is unshroud the valves and then port at least the bowls, maybe. Do you do private consulting? I don't know what you mean by that. I try to answer all the questions that people have here. Do you have any built LS motors in any project cars? I do. I have a really nice stock LM7 in my 2003 or 2002, because 2003 would not be good. This is a 2002 1500 Silverado. And it had a broken transmission, but that's all fixed now too. Is a 225 head flowing 313 at 600 too much for a 427? No, it's not too much. We run 225 heads on, we've run them on 5.3s. We've run them on stock 6.0s. That's head's fine. And guess what? Saturday night, I got to go see Lisa. It's my girl. Thank you guys all for showing up. Hopefully you've taken a look. If not, go take a look at the video that I put up. Carburetors versus fuel injection. You get to yell and argue back and forth of what's better. You get all the carburetor guys saying, carburetors make more putty, and get the EFIs guys go, oh, you guys are just a bunch of boomers, or whatever the current argument is. Do you think a Ford 300 with LS head projects will make good power if it works? The LS head flows a lot more than that stock 6-cylinder head. So yes, it has the potential to make a lot more power. And I'm out. We out.